This lesson is predominantly coming from this section of the Bible shown in the highlighted section of this chart. Lesson 24, The People of Canaan and Judgment. We start today's lesson by learning about people inhabiting the land of Canaan. Although this land was composed of Amalekites, Amorites, Hivites, Jebusites, Hittites, Perizzites, and a few others, for the sake of time and ease, I will refer to all these people as Canaanites. From widespread human sacrifice performed on children, to perverted sexual religious rites and rampant immorality, these people had religious and moral practices that were abhorrent in the eyes of God. Ignoring the stark warning God gave them during the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah, they continued to sin for about another 500 years. It was now time for God to judge these people using a conquering nation, namely Israel. Before the Israelites ever entered the promised land, God instructed them repeatedly not to form any kind of relationship with the people of the land of Canaan. No friendships, no marriages, not even as servants were the Israelites to allow these people to stay among them. Not only did God command the Israelites to annihilate these people, but God told them to break down and demolish all their altars, statues, idols, and places of worship. God warned the Israelites that if they did not follow his instruction regarding these people, the Israelites would soon adopt their ways and receive the same punishment by God. In other words, God put no difference between the Israelites and the Canaanites regarding these abhorrent practices. It simply would not be tolerated regardless of who practiced this type of lifestyle. God chose to use Israel as his judgment on the Canaanites because it would serve not only to punish the Canaanites for their sins, but also warn the Israelites as a very vivid, graphic object lesson of what would happen to them if they adopted the lifestyle and practices of the Canaanites. The topic of judgment has been used incorrectly to manipulate many throughout history. Because of this, we want to explain some of the general principles of judgment in the context of the Bible. Only God decides who, when, where, how, and why anyone or any people will be judged. Although we are about to go into a book filled with warfare, understand this was at God's instruction. In the Old Testament, under the Old Covenant, many times God used warfare to judge rather than always using fire and brimstone. Incidents in the Old Testament where God commanded warfare on certain people cannot be used as an excuse for anyone under the New Covenant to take upon themselves the right to afflict any people. The main point to be stressed here is that in the New Covenant, God does not command any physical affliction of any kind to stop sin. The New Testament does tell believers that the weapons of our warfare against sin and Satan are not carnal or physical, but spiritual, such as prayer, preaching, and teaching. The command to fight a spiritual warfare is not to be confused with fighting a physical warfare or using physical tactics against any people. Keep in mind here, we are just talking about sin. We are not talking about crime, which God had commissioned the government to maintain. That is a whole different topic. Sin and crime are different issues and dealt with in different ways by God. The point should be made that although we may not understand why God implemented different policies under different covenants, we must nevertheless submit to his policies. It was now time for Israel to conquer the land of Canaan and possess the promised land. In the sight of all the leaders of Israel, Moses, at the command of God, anointed Joshua to be the next leader to take the Israelites to the promised land. Then Moses went up the mountain and viewed the promised land, and then died, and was buried by God at the age of 120 years old. To this day, no one knows where Moses was buried. God instructed Joshua to lead the Israelites into the promised land. It would be under his leadership that the Israelites would conquer the land of Canaan. Joshua, in the Old Testament, typified Christ in the New Testament in terms of defeating and conquering the enemy. As Joshua defeated the physical enemy of God's people and conquered the land to give Israel their inheritance in the Old Testament, Jesus Christ would defeat the spiritual enemy of God's people and conquer death to give the church their inheritance among the saints in the New Testament. Although this was actual history in the Old Testament, the book of Joshua prophesies about Jesus in a symbolic way. In our next lesson, we will look at how Israel conquers the land of Canaan. Don't miss our next lesson. Until next time, goodbye for now.